The state of Texas wants to pass a law that will make it easier to remove squatters from properties, but it could also make it easier to remove bad tenants. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's coming out of the great state of Texas, and it has to do with a law that they are trying to pass that would make it easier to remove squatters from properties. So it would make it easier to remove them by removing a lot of the waiting periods and the extremely long judicial process. So the judicial process to remove a tenant in Texas isn't that long, but when we're talking about people who are trespassing on properties, we're talking about people who are tearing your property up, you need every single extra amount of time possible so you can get them people the heck up out of there. So I agree with this sort of law. Now, a lot of the critics of it are saying, hey, but you're gonna go after good tenants and use this law in order to punish them. And I'm like, well, you know what? Good tenants do not end up in the eviction process in the first place, okay? Good tenants, people who are paying their rent on time, not tearing your property up, not causing problems, they're not gonna have any issue whatsoever. Why in the world would a landlord want to use this on a good tenant, okay? That's the first question I have for you. Okay, why would a landlord say, you know what, man, I just don't like this person. I'm just gonna get rid of them. So I'm gonna use this convoluted law in order to do it. Well, they wouldn't. They absolutely would not. Not only that, but a landlord, if they were going to try to get rid of a good tenant, they could use the current law. There might be a little bit more waiting period, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't do it, okay? If they, if you had a landlord who just was evil or whatever, right? And I'm not saying landlords are evil because we're not, okay? We are working on the assumption that, hey, this is about profit. This isn't about charity. I don't give a crap about charity. I don't give a crap about what you're going through right now. I just want to get paid. And if I'm going through the eviction process, 95% of all evictions are for non-payment of rent. So when you go beyond that, we're talking about other issues. And that's what this new law in Texas is really dealing with, okay? And most of the time it's going to be used for squatters. There might be a few bad apples out there, but we're talking about a state of like 30 million people. Okay, having a few bad apples, that's possible. A few bad landlords. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So first of all, do you think they should make it easier to remove squatters? And do you think we should not pass new laws to make it easier to remove squatters because maybe, one or two tenants might be affected by it? First of all, like I said, when it comes to squatters, I've told you in other videos before, I do believe that a tenant who is not paying rent, even if that person signed a lease with you, okay, that person is a squatter as well. They're just as much stealing money from the landlord. They're just as much damaging the landlord's properties. They're doing everything the squatter is doing, but they just happen to have signed a lease with you, so therefore we can't get rid of them. They're not stealing from you. They're not trespassing. Yeah, you don't want them there. They're not paying you rent. They're destroying your property. Guess what? They're a squatter as well. And maybe this new law will address that issue and say, hey, yeah, these tenants who are doing this sort of stuff, even if they signed a lease with you, they're squatters as well. Okay, maybe, that's what I hope. But let's see what the article says, okay? This article is coming from the HoustonChronicle.com, and it says, Texas leaders want to crack down on squatters. Their bill would make it easier to evict any renter. Making it easier to evict is not a bad thing, okay? Well, I don't understand why they're all like, we're willy-nilly just evicting people just because we feel like it. Oh yeah, Karen over here who has been perfect on her rent for the last 3 years and, pays all the rent increases, keeps her property in great shape. I'm just going to evict her just because I feel like it. No. Of course not. Anyway, let me get into the article and see what it says. Ahead of this year's legislative session, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick asked state lawmakers to look for ways to secure Texas against the plight of people illegally occupying residential spaces. Governor Greg Abbott also promised to tackle the increasing problem that we face in the state caused by squatters. But the legislation that emerged has little, if anything, to do with what housing experts typically think of as squatting. Instead, it would radically transform the eviction process for millions of Texas renters, making it easier for landlords to evict them, often without notice or a legal proceeding. Tenant advocates, judges, and lawyers have raised the alarm about House Bill 32, calling it a Trojan horse that would strip tenants of their due process rights and erode judicial authority. The presumption here is that landlords have the correct case, and any defense that a tenant has is false, said Ben Martin, research director at the nonprofit Texas Housers. It makes the eviction process in Texas, once and for all, a rubber stamp for landlords. And of course, that's what these tenant advocates are going to say. They're going to sit there and be like, oh, no, we don't want any law that makes it easier for landlords to be able to evict a tenant. Not even considering the fact that, hey, 95% of all evictions, they're not even squatters. They're for people who just aren't paying their rent. 95% of them. The other 5% are for people who are being evicted for other reasons, and that might include those squatters in there. Now, the reason that this sort of law needs to pass is because there's been a few very high-profile cases, and these cases have illustrated that, hey, landlords can have their properties literally stolen from them, and they have no recourse, absolutely no recourse other than the civil eviction process. And the civil eviction process is slow. So even in a state of Texas, which is very landlord friendly, it can take a landlord a great amount of time to be able to get rid of a person who just walked up and decided that they wanted to live in a property. So that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Also, in my opinion, this should be the same law should apply to people who have a lease who are trespassing, who don't have a lease who are trespassing. Trespassing is trespassing. Property damage is property damage. Okay, there might be a little bit more of an argument if you had a lease at some point in time, but it's still a crime. Let's say, for example, you are a tenant who, okay, your lease ends in the month of December, okay? And you decide, hey, I'm just not leaving. I'm not paying rent anymore. I don't have a new lease. I refuse to sign the new lease. I'm not leaving. And so here comes the month of January. You're no longer paying rent. You no longer have a lease. The landlord doesn't want you there, right? And you're just, I'm just going to kick holes in the wall. Now you're doing property damage. So not only are you trespassing at this point, right? But you're committing property damage as well. And, simply put, it's theft. You're staying in a property that you did not pay for. Okay? It's January at this point. Your lease is over. So here's the question, right? Why is it that I can't have you just removed? Now, they were like, well, this is for non-payment of rent. Well, that would be under the assumption that you actually were a renter. But at this point, you're not a renter. But in the case of state law, they're saying, oh, well, because you had a lease for last year, that means that you're an actual tenant of this landlord. No, your lease is over. That's the way I see things, okay? I believe that at the end of the lease, if you don't have a new lease in place, you are no longer a tenant, and then we should be able to remove you like a trespasser, not like a tenant, okay? Now, that's, to me, would be the way that things should be operated. And unfortunately, it isn't in most places, including here where I invest, okay? So you're going to have to go through the civil eviction process, and whatever amount of time it takes to get the tenant out, which, remember, I'm in a landlord-friendly state. Texas is a landlord-friendly state. It's not going to take a super long amount of time, but every single day they're in there, you are losing money, okay? And they could be tearing your property apart. So that's why we need to make sure the process is expedited. That's why this legislature down in Texas is trying to make it easier to remove these tenants as soon as possible, okay? So anyway, let me continue with this story. The proposed law would eliminate the requirement to provide a notice to vacate when a landlord is evicting a tenant for any reason other than falling behind on rent. If a tenant was accused of smoking in a non-designated area, for instance, a landlord could file immediately to evict them, which becomes part of the tenant's rental history. Tenants who fall behind on rent would still receive a notice to vacate. But in both instances, if a landlord asserts there are no genuinely disputed facts in the case, they could request a summary judgment, meaning the eviction case would be decided without a trial. And that sounds actually like a pretty good idea. Okay, so you would no longer have to take a squatter, a person who is squatting in your property, to trial. Okay, that's one of the little tactics that squatters and professional tenants and con men use in order to extend their stay, essentially, for free. They're like, I need a jury trial for this eviction case. Here we are, you own the property, you got somebody staying up in there illegally, and they're demanding a jury trial. Give me a break, okay? Instead, nope, summary judgment, get them the heck out of there, okay? No more notice requirements, get them the heck out of there. So I still believe that this is a criminal issue when it comes to the squatters, and those people should be arrested and moved immediately. But it seems like the law, what they're trying to do is use the law within the civil eviction process to remove the people quicker rather than having the police go out there and arrest them. Why can't we do both? Okay, why can't we do both? Go after these people every way you can, remove them from the property, get them the heck out of there, and it's no longer an issue. The article that I'm covering, it's a very, it sides more with the tenant side of the issue than with the landlord side. But you know what? I'm going to tell you what I think, and I think this is a good law. And let me know what you think in the comment section down below.